All right, another very short and easy chapter here. Small discussion about our last attempt at managing security incidents, and that is how to mitigate security incidents. So how can you make sure that they don't happen again? And the first approach to an incident is going to be how to contain it. Before we can do anything else, let's limit the damage as much as possible. Now, in order to do this, first of all, we need to analyze what exactly was affected. So how much did we lose, or how much do we risk losing if we don't act now? Also, we need to be aware of the resources that we have at our disposal. How can we act, and what resources we can use in order to respond to a specific type of incident? Of course, there's no cookie cutter method here that is going to apply to pretty much any type of incident out there, or any type of security incident. That's why planning for incident response is usually going to be a continuous process that keeps updating and updating according to the threats that we keep identifying in the world and in other companies such as ours, or even in past security events. When thinking about countermeasures, we need to know what exactly do we have at our disposal, and also what's the cost, because we might be able to quickly implement an additional security solution, but that one might be too costly, or the additional security solution might take too long to be implemented, or it might actually hinder the business operations. So we might not be able to continue doing our business simply because we are in some sort of a lockdown due to the evolution of the attack. Finally, how can we act not just according to the incident response procedure, but also we need to think about how can we act without alerting the attacker. What we do is going to be sensed by the attacker as well, is going to be received by the attacker as well. If we're planning on learning something from that incident, perhaps what we are doing should be designed not to alert the attacker as to what our intentions are. And coming here back to the previous example here, if you just pull the plug on everything, it's going to stop the attack. But you will never understand what happened and how can you prevent it in the future. So an isolation type of containment is a method by which we are removing or isolating the affected systems from the rest of the network. It could be done in a logical manner, so we could just enable some access lists or some filters so that those affected systems are not able to communicate outside of the affected network segment, or it could be just a physical disconnection from the network, or a physical port shutdown on the switch that is connecting those affected devices. Also, this isolation could refer to disabling some logical entity such as a user account that was used to conduct the attack. Simply temporarily disabling that user account from performing any other actions on the domain and network is going to stop the attack, but it's also going to allow you to further investigate by looking at the generated logs and events, what exactly happened and how did that user end up being compromised. Additionally, a different type of isolation is called segmentation. Segmentation containment is a type of isolation that is performed using networking functions. That is layer 3 or layer 4 access lists or MAC access lists that are applied directly on the affected interfaces. Another type of segmentation containment is to contain the traffic flow using a specific routing policy. What do we mean by that? Well, let's assume that there is a constant flow. You're able to identify the attack traffic coming in. It might be command and control traffic. It might be a denial of service traffic. It might be some sort of a continuous traffic flow that is attempting to exploit a vulnerability. Well, that traffic flow, once identified, you could just drop it, of course, or you could redirect it to some sort of a sinkhole or a honeynet or a honeypot in which that traffic is now captured and further analyzed in order to determine the nature of the attack and perhaps even the identity of the attacker. And part of the segmentation containment, especially in malware-based attacks, is to identify the piece of malware involved in the attack and then run it in an isolated environment. It might be a sandbox. It might be just a virtual machine that is completely disconnected from the rest of the network that allows you to analyze what that malware does and how you're supposed to detect it a second time in the future. And if you remember from our previous discussion about incident response phases, you probably remember one phase that was about recovering the systems or rebuilding the affected systems. Now, rebuilding an affected system might range from a simple malware scan and a disinfection down to an actual destruction of the entire data set that is stored on that system and a rebuild from scratch. That is a complete reinstall of the operating system, all of the applications, a reconfiguration, rejoining that system to the domain network, and perhaps even updating or patching any potential vulnerabilities in the software that is running in there. Security policies and security controls also need to be checked as part of the recovery procedure, because nobody can deny the fact that the incident was able to happen because it was allowed to happen. So at some point, there is a device in your network that actually permitted that malware traffic to go through, that command and control traffic to go through. So there is definitely some point of security enforcement in your network that needs to be updated in order to catch future attempts at similar types of exploitations. Also on the networking part, especially for firewalling solutions or UTM or next generation firewall solutions, there's probably going to be a bit of an administrative effort involved here in updating the access list and the security policies built into these devices. You will have to check using the logs, using the events generated by those devices, when did the attack happen and how it could have been prevented. What type of traffic was allowed, where it was initiated from, why was it allowed, all right? And how did that compromised workstation end up being compromised in the first place? Because there had to be some sort of a delivery vector. That workstation had to be involved in some sort of a phishing attempt by clicking a link, by downloading an executable file, by installing a backdoor that it knew nothing about. So something happened at some point that allowed the attack to go through. You need to identify what was that exact event and how could that event be prevented or detected, at least by your security devices, mainly your firewalls. Once you identify the malicious destinations involved in the attack, which shouldn't be really hard if you have a proper logging procedure in place, you will have to identify those bad reputation destinations and of course add them to a block list on all your networking devices. Don't allow any further communications with something that has already proven to be harmful in the past. Also, review the security posture and security policies for your users. Do they really need access to any destination on the internet? Maybe we should perhaps implement some sort of URL filtering based on categories. Don't allow your users to visit just any website out there, especially if it has nothing to do with work productivity and perhaps even if it doesn't have to do with their job. Well, at least allow them access to social media perhaps, but don't allow them access to just any website out there with no reputation information or websites that have appeared in the last 12 hours or so. Those are definitely bad news. Update your content filters. That is, if you're performing layer 7 inspection, you're looking at malware, you're looking at spam, you're looking at abnormal protocol usage, scanning for injection attacks and weird payloads. If you're doing any of that, those are going to be some signatures in there that need to be constantly updated. Make sure that your device does this automatically. Most of them can do this automatically, so it's not going to be a full-time job just taking care of updating everything all over the place. And review your DLP policies if necessary. And if you have a DLP policy, of course, it might not be strictly related to your attack or to the security incident that you just faced, but even if nobody attempted to exfiltrate information from your network and it was a completely different type of an attack, you don't know what lurks behind the corner, what's going to happen the next time you are subjected to a data breach. Because in many situations, an attack is conducted with the purpose of stealing information. And if you're not able to stop the attack from happening, perhaps you would be able to stop that data from leaving your company at least. So that's going to be a well-formed and well-implemented DLP policy. As part of the lessons learned and as part of the remediation phase after an incident, you also have to review your endpoints, your workstations, because most likely those are going to be the first point of contact and the first point of compromise for the attack that's just happened. In many cases, a workstation, a simple laptop or a simple mobile device is the patient zero whenever a data breach happens. Right? So there's just a regular user who is tricked into clicking a link or downloading some piece of malware, and everything starts, all the disaster starts from one single workstation. So Make sure you have some sort of vulnerability scanning process in place. If you didn't have one, maybe it's time to think about one. There are free solutions, open source solutions out there. Greenbone or OpenVAS, one of them. Now, of course, if you're willing to pay for commercial solutions that offer vulnerability scanning, you're going to get much better results. Enhance and update your security controls. Maybe you don't have antivirus, anti-malware installed in your host. Maybe you don't have an endpoint protection suite. Evaluate some of these options. Make sure you choose one that is financially feasible and actually improves your security posture. Review the standard configurations of your host. Maybe you don't even need an additional security solution. Maybe you only need to update some group policy objects that are being pushed to your workstations. And that might be enough to just increase the security policy, get better security. Harden your hosts. Review everything that's open and that might invite an attacker from the outside. Open interfaces, open ports, applications that nobody uses, services that have been enabled ever since the installation of the operating system. And again, nobody uses them, but they still pose the risk of increasing your attack surface. So host hardening, that's a process that should be reviewed from time to time. And don't forget about users as well, because those are always going to be the weakest link. Try to educate them. Try to make them understand the risks of what they're doing, the implications of clicking a link, of downloading a file, of trusting somebody who impersonates a figure of authority or somebody from tech support without checking their credentials and their identity. Make them understand that they could be responsible for a disaster, and that should be enough to scare them. At least enough to make them attend the mandatory training on social engineering. And implement configuration updates under the form of an allow list or a block list. You decide which approach you're going to take. It might be about application execution, in which you are defining which applications you are allowed to install and to execute on your workstations. That might be a whitelist approach or an allow list approach. You might also have a block list approach in which you are denying access to specific website categories, for example. So depending on where you're implementing this type of policy and what type of security control, technical security control is being affected, you might need to find a balance between whitelist approaches and block list approaches. That's up to you. Finally, if your mitigation attempts are not successful, or if you're not 100% sure that it was successful, you might be better off just withholding the affected systems in an isolated environment, such as a quarantine VLAN or just a small isolated network for future analysis and perhaps even forensic investigations. You don't really have to determine everything under the pressure of time at the moment when the event is happening. It's enough to know that the attack has been contained and that you have taken some measures. And then later on, as part of the lessons learned process, you could go back and analyze those systems and find out more about what actually happened, who was the attacker, and what type of attack was conducted, and what type of attack methodology was used. As a concept, SOAR, or Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response, is an automated approach to incident response. And as good as it sounds, is as difficult it is to implement in real life. The SOAR is designed to be a type of dedicated solution that attempts to solve the problem of overwhelming alerts, of the security team not able to process that many alerts, that many events, and not being able to investigate so many things happening at the same time in a network, especially during an incident. At its core is a system that can correlate multiple sources of information. So sometimes the SOAR functionality becomes an additional functionality on a next generation SIEM device. It could be a dedicated device or a standalone device in itself, but more often than not, it is going to use the intelligence from the SIEM appliance. It might also complement it with some machine learning abilities and perhaps even some additional external knowledge. And as part of the response phase, a well-behaved and well-trained SOAR system could potentially dynamically create access list entries, filter different types of traffic, reconfigure the network, especially if it's an SDN-based network, create, disable, remove user accounts, temporarily disable applications, or block specific ports, anything that normally would take a lot longer to identify and to implement for a manual intervention team. And the good news is that it's not just a type of tool that shows its benefits during an incident response phase, but it's actually a tool that can be used during threat hunting as well. Now, threat hunting is something that you do when you've got nothing else to do as a security analyst. It's basically a process in which you decide periodically to look for indicators of compromise for those types of persistent threats that are really hard and tough to identify. So threat hunting happens when everything is good, everything is green, but you just think that it might warrant some investigation just in case we're missing something which is staring us right in the eye right here. And remember the terminology that we introduced along with the incident response phases and along with the automation techniques that we mentioned a couple of videos ago. So whenever we're talking about orchestration, because basically this is orchestration of security incidents, right? We're automating the response to security incidents. And the lists of tasks that need to be executed whenever this automation kicks in, now these are called runbooks or playbooks. One last topic here to mention, which is more on the realm of sci-fi for now, is the adversarial machine learning or adversarial AI approach from an attacker. What exactly is this? Well, in order to understand this, let's try to remember when we talked about machine learning or artificial intelligence, and we said that these approaches are extremely beneficial for all these systems that analyze the behavior of users, of workstations, of applications, and then try to build a baseline of their functionality. They're trying to identify how is that user normally behaving, how is that application normally behaving, thus building a machine learning model. Then on top of that machine learning model, we can then identify any outliers, any events that don't match what we've seen before. Now, the same thing can happen in order to detect malware. So we could be analyzing samples of code, of behavior in our applications, perhaps even send them to some cloud environment, to some cloud analytics service, in which that behavior is analyzed and further stored in order to build a baseline for what that application or that user is supposed to function in its good days. Now, adversarial AI, and try to keep an open mind about this, is the involvement of the attacker in these centralized machine learning environments in which the attacker, using its own machine learning or AI-able tools, and the attacker is generating their own samples, fake samples, in order to be injected in this analytics engine. By slowly educating that machine learning engine into believing that whatever behavior the attacker is about to exhibit when they launch their attack is supposed to be considered normal. I don't know if you ever did an allergy treatment where you are slowly and steadily exposed to the allergen in order to educate your immune system to learn about it and to understand that it doesn't pose a threat. This is probably the closest example I can give you, which looks like adversarial AI, in which the attacker starts slowly training the actual security solution that was designed to catch abnormal behavior into making it believe that whatever attack the attacker is about to conduct is normal, is part of an educated and modeled, as machine learning goes, a modeled baseline. So it's smart, it's a bit cheesy. It's still in the sci-fi realm for now because there aren't really documented situations in which this has actually happened. But it is possible, and it might have happened without us knowing about it. Another approach to this would be for an attacker to submit fake samples or fake hashes of files that are supposed to be malicious, and when submitting them, they're also reporting them as being safe to online scanning services such as VirusTotal or other antivirus, anti-malware proprietary solutions such as Cisco Talos. And then, of course, when the actual malware is detected in the network, your security equipments are going to scan that file, is going to generate a hash of that file, and they're going to upload it to some cloud environment, which is going to send back a verdict about that file saying, I've seen this file before, and I've been told it is not malicious. So to go ahead and allow it to run, and that file is actually malware. fun stuff, right? Especially fun when the videos aren't that long. And fortunately, the end of this training is made up of small and interesting tidbits of information like this video right here. So thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, support, do whatever you normally do after watching a video that you enjoy. And don't forget to watch the next video as well. Thank you so much and see you next time.